Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mobile Lab Coalition webinar entitled Program Evaluation for Mobile Science Education. My name is Sarah Weisberg, and I am the chair of the Board of Directors of the Mobile Laboratory Coalition. For those of you who are new to our community, I'll explain a bit more about the Mobile Lab Coalition and our aims, but I also wanted to start by thanking our speaker, Sandra Larray from NISR, the National Institute for STEM Evaluation and Research, for being with us here today. So we have a great session for you, and the aim is to cover some of the basics of program evaluation and then talk about how that applies more specifically to mobile science education. So, the Mobile Laboratory Coalition is a member organization comprised of very different mobile science education projects and programs from around the country and across the globe. Currently we have 28 member programs, and those range. Some are just getting started. Some have been in the mobile science business for years. I personally, so once again, my name is Sarah Weisberg. I'm the chair of the Mobile Lab Coalition Board, and I'm also a chief scientist with a nonprofit called BioBus, which operates a mobile lab in New York City. We started with one, and actually today we are in Idaho driving our second mobile lab across the country. And we do that as a way to bring top quality, top tier, hands-on based science experiences to students and audiences that normally would not have access to those types of resources. We, as a coalition, believe strongly that science education is empowering, and that also the high quality science education is not always distributed equally, and we can help with that by taking our passions and excitements and curiosities and our tools and putting them into a movable vehicle and driving to different communities. I'm happy to answer any questions about the Mobile Lab Coalition later on in our session. I also wanted to just give a quick word about how this is going to work, and then we'll wait another minute or so for additional attendees to join. So we'll start, Sandra's presentation will start in about 2 minutes, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. As we're going through the presentation, please feel free to type in questions. I will be able to see your questions, and I will be fielding questions for Sandra both as we go through the webinar and also as we get to the Q&A session at the end. Please go ahead and type in your questions as soon as you think of them, but we'll answer them, just maybe not right away. Okay, I'll wait another minute or so. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, welcome. once again to our webinar entitled Program Evaluation for Mobile Science Education. My name is Sarah Weisberg, and I am the chair of the Board of Directors of the Mobile Laboratory Coalition, a member-based organization aimed at advancing the field of mobile science education, and I'm pleased and honored to have here with me Sandra Leray from NISER, the National Institute for STEM Evaluation and Research, to guide us through thinking about how we evaluate programs and what exactly that means. So without further ado, Sandra, please take it away, and you can feel free to type in questions as we go along. Okay, here we go.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm going to close my chat box and get started. Okay. There we go. So as Sarah mentioned, my name is Sandra, and I'm an evaluation associate for the National Institute for STEM Evaluation and Research, NISER, and we are located within NIMBUS, which is the National Institute for Mathematical and Biological Synthesis at the University of Tennessee. And I had the opportunity to meet Sarah at an evaluation conference we had at UT in February, I believe. So I get to work with a wonderful group of evaluators. Our director is Dr. Pam Bishop, and she's the director of not only NISER, but also the associate director for STEM evaluation for NIMBUS. So when Sarah invited me to talk today, I was very excited. I've been watching your Ignite webinars on the Mobile Lab Coalition website, and so I'm hoping today that I'm able to build on some of the things that have been in your first 3 webinars and bring in some beginning thoughts about evaluation as you prepare for your own mobile labs, but also for thinking about evaluation and impact goals for the coalition as a whole. So I'm imagining, based on what I saw in the first 3 webinars, that we have a mix of people watching the webinar today. Some of you may be program directors and staff of mobile labs that are already up and running, and some of you may be in the planning stages of thinking about starting a mobile lab, and then I think we have some STEM educators here watching the webinar that are just interested in learning more about program evaluation and STEM education. And what we'll talk about today will fit a variety of different needs. So here's our agenda for our short time together. I'll talk for about 25 minutes or so, take questions, and then share a couple of resource slides with you. So we'll start with what is program evaluation, what are some approaches to evaluation, the evaluation process, and thinking about developing a framework for evaluating mobile labs. We'll take some questions and comments, and then I'll end off with a couple of slides that give you information about places you can go to for more information. So let's start right away with what is program evaluation. And truly, there's a lot of different ways to define evaluation, but I think what often comes to mind for people is return on investment or thinking about impacts. And one way that I like to create an analogy for return on investment is with money, because that's sometimes what comes to mind for people. So let's say we have a bank in your town and it's offering 1% return on investment. But then also in town, we have another bank that's going to offer 10%. So if you are evaluating or thinking about where you might want to invest your money, you may start out in the first bank that's offering 1%, and if you're not looking for other opportunities and not engaging or evaluating what's out there as far as offerings, you may miss out on the bank that's offering 10%. So when we talk about evaluation, we talk about taking a look at how we're investing our time and our emotional investment when I think about mobile labs and our resources to create the best return on investment or to demonstrate the greatest impacts. And as a matter of fact, we do evaluation every day without even realizing it. Anytime you make a purchase, you're doing an evaluation. Do I want to buy the larger jar of mayonnaise because the cost per ounce is cheaper, or will that spoil before I have a chance to use it? So another way to think about program evaluation or to define it is with a quote from Michael Quinn Patton. And he's an evaluator who's best known for utilization-focused evaluation or developmental evaluation. And he defines program evaluation this way: as a systematic collection of data about the activities, characteristics, and results of programs to do really 4 things: to help make judgments, to improve or further develop program effectiveness, to make informed decisions, and to increase understanding. And there are really 4 elements to program evaluations. There's that systematic process. There's data collection that will enhance our knowledge and inform our decision making. So let's say, for example, let's go back to that bank example. Let's say that I had some money that I wanted to invest, and I'm going through a systematic process of evaluating different places that I can put my money. So I may gather data about minimum balance requirements, what the interest rates might be, and that'll inform my knowledge about where I want to place that investment, and it'll help me make decisions for the future. So why is program evaluation important? It's important for a variety of reasons, but here are just a few. Program evaluation can enhance your project design. It can help you have a rich, impact-based plan. It defines your resources and timelines for deliverables. So what do you have? What resource do you have? And when are you going to communicate that information? It improves the implementation and effectiveness of projects. So when we're evaluating our work along the way, we're able to make changes and adaptations that will improve our outcomes and impacts. And it supports plans for sustainability. So in the last webinar that you had, I noticed that the speaker spent quite a bit of time talking about foundation support or donor support for mobile labs, and she talked about creating an impact or a return on investment. So when we use evaluation, it helps us plan for the future. How are we going to engage donors and communicate our impacts? So it provides that evidence to support future funding. Okay, let's move on to the second part in our agenda, approaches to evaluation. So oftentimes when we think about assessing the success of a project or a program, we think about 2 types of information. We think about formative evaluation and summative evaluation. And I often think about this in terms of cooking. So formative evaluation would be checking in along the way. So for example, let's say I had a recipe that I wanted to try out with my family. I'd do some planning, I'd gather the ingredients, I'd read the recipe card, and along the way I might test what I'm cooking. I might taste it. And if the recipe calls for maybe 1/4 teaspoon of salt, I might want to increase that to 1/2 teaspoon and taste it along the way, and I might think it tastes great. For my summative evaluation, I would serve my recipe to my family, and they would give me some culminating information. Did they like it? Did they not like it? Did they think it was maybe too salty and that it wasn't a good idea to add more salt than what the recipe called for? Is it good enough to be a part of our regular weekly family meals? And we can think about this in an even bigger scope. So we're talking about mobile labs primarily today. So let's use an example where we decide that the children in America need to eat more Brussels sprouts. So we're going to start a campaign for making Brussels sprouts more appealing to young children. So we have a super fancy recipe that we think is going to be really awesome. So we're going to try out this Brussels sprout recipe and gather small groups of children to pilot test our Brussels sprout recipes along the way. And we'll make improvements based on their feedback along the way. That's our formative evaluation as we're forming the product. And then for our summative evaluation, we have this recipe that we think is ready to go, and we're ready to test it out with maybe a larger group, and we're going to find out whether it was a success or not. Now, remember the 4 steps in evaluation. We have a systematic process for trying out this Brussels recipe. We're going to collect data along the way and at the end. We're going to use that data collection to enhance our knowledge and make decisions. And what we might find out was this really is a super great Brussels sprouts recipe that we want to put in a recipe book for children. Or we may discover there isn't anything that we were able to do to help children like Brussels sprouts more, and we may want to take on, maybe try asparagus next time. So people often ask, when is the right time to get started with your evaluation? And our answer is always as soon as possible. So I know that some of you that are listening are just beginning your mobile lab design. And that is a great time to get started with evaluation, because you're going to be formulating goals that you would like to achieve with your mobile lab. And it's a perfect time in the design phase to think about, well, how are we going to evaluate the success of these impacts? Or how are we going to be able to evaluate any changes that we need? And then some of you that are listening may already have an established mobile lab. It's also a great time to talk about evaluation right now, because there may be things that you can do to help gather further evidence to be able to communicate the impacts that you are making, both for the people that are involved, but also for the people that are donating or supporting your mobile lab. Okay, let's talk now about the evaluation process. So the typical evaluation process is best described as being cyclical in nature. So you'll notice there's an arrow at the end of my little circle here, and that's to show that we keep engaging in the evaluation process throughout the entire project. So it doesn't end. We're always reevaluating. And the center of the evaluation process is your project. Your project is unique. There are no other projects exactly like your project. And so what goals and impacts that you wish to make are unique to your project, and that's the central core to the evaluation process. Sometimes we go back and skip over sections of the circle or make a return stop. So, for example, I might be doing some formative evaluation of my mobile lab, and one of my goals might be to reach K-12 students in rural areas with my mobile lab. And I might start analyzing my data and realize that, you know what, we haven't been spending as much time in rural areas as we planned. So we may want to go back and develop some new evaluation questions to help us get at how can we engage those rural communities and go back through the evaluation process with enhanced information. Okay, so we're going to work our way through the evaluation process fairly quickly. We do have a more lengthy webinar on YouTube, and I'll share the link with that to you at the end. So we'll start with looking at a few things. We want to map our project. We want to determine who our key stakeholders are. And those key stakeholders are the people that we want to serve and the people that help invest in our organization. And then we want to practice developing some evaluation questions. So I love this cartoon from the New Yorker. It shows some calculations of some projects. And so we can imagine that there's project implementation, and some kind of miracle occurs, and then we achieve some impacts. We want to know more about what that miracle is. Whenever I see this cartoon, I think about a Super Bowl commercial that was out a few years ago. It showed a young boy dressed in a Darth Vader costume, and he's in the driveway, and he has his hand out, his hand out towards his parents' car, and he's trying to use the Force. And inside the house, you can see his dad and he's got the automatic ignition, the button, and the car engine starts, and the boy in the driveway thinks that he's used the Force to turn on the car. And I always think of that as the miracle that occurs. So we have a plan for our project, or it's something that we want to accomplish with our mobile lab, for example, and we know that we get some impacts, or we hope that we get some impacts, but what's that piece that happens in the middle? That's what we need to communicate. Just like the quotation says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. We need to be more explicit with what it is that we're doing. Okay, so we want to map our project. We want to begin with the end in mind. This is the logic model, a sample, and it's just one way to map your project, to make that invisible piece where the miracle happens visible to your stakeholders. So a logic model often starts with a situation, and that's the problem you want to solve, or the situation you want to improve. You have inputs. Those are some things you're going to invest. That's your people, your time, your resources, your mobile lab itself. And then you'll have some outputs, and those will be your participants and the activities you'll do with the participants. And then you'll have some impacts. And today, I thought we'd use an example that is similar. It's like BioBus loosely translated. So I took what I knew about BioBus and created an example logic model. And I tried to capture some of the things that I saw in the first 2 webinars and what I've learned from Sarah about BioBus. So this is just BioBus loosely translated. So the situation, we'll imagine this example situation. We have K-12 students who are traditionally underrepresented in STEM in our area, and maybe they don't have access to hands-on laboratory equipment in their schools. So our inputs are going to be, of course, our mobile lab itself, but our staff time, volunteer time, some student time, because we'll be asking students, they'll come out of their classroom and out to engage in the mobile lab, maybe in their school parking lot or in a community, a place in their community. Teachers, they're taking some of their teaching time to help their students engage in the lab. And of course, we have funding sources that are going to be inputs. Our outputs are going to be our participants and the activities that we choose to do. We might say that some of our activities might be, we're going to engage 20,000 students across 100 schools, and we're going to bring them onto our mobile laboratory. We're going to do a hands-on demonstration about how to use a microscope. They're going to create a microscope slide. They watch a short video about who can be a scientist. We'll talk about how the mobile lab is a sustainable energy module. And we'll have some impacts, some things that we hope will be their return on investment. And for this example, we'll continue on talking about evaluation. We're going to kind of zero in on those elementary students for our example today. And these impacts that I'm showing on the right-hand side of the screen in the blue boxes, Those impacts come from the citations at the bottom from the National Science Foundation's framework for evaluating informal science education projects. And the information is at the bottom of the screen. But we'll imagine that we have these 5 impacts that we hope students will gain from participating in this example mobile lab. They'll increase their awareness, knowledge, and understanding of STEM, careers and concepts. Will increase their engagement or interest in STEM. Will hopefully improve their attitude or access to STEM-related topics. Their behaviors from resulting in the participation might be greater engagement, and the skills that they acquire from participating. This may be their first opportunity to use a microscope. They may have some skills, some impacts related to that experience. Okay, once we have a framework in mind or map, and we're beginning with the end in mind, we'll want to develop some evaluation questions. So I'm going to take the same impacts that are listed on the right-hand side in my logic model, and I'm going to write some evaluation questions for the students. So I have impact category, increase awareness, knowledge, or understanding, and I'm going to write some questions that will help me gather evidence on that impact category. So they might be questions like this. To what extent do students understand the importance of sustainable energy resources? Are students able to identify a wide range of diverse people as those who can be scientists? And did students gain an understanding of how a microscope works and what it can be used for? Again, looking at another impact, I might want to ask these questions to tell me about interest or engagement in my mobile lab. So I might ask, to what extent do students from underrepresented groups in STEM state an interest in becoming a scientist? Remember, that was my situation in my logic model that I wanted to address. And then engaging their attitude, I might have questions about, do students have a more positive attitude towards science after participating in my mobile lab? Do they have a better appreciation for limited energy resources available now as in the future? And that's part of my mobile laboratory, is talking about sustainability. So I have my map, and then my logic model. I've got some evaluation questions. Now I really need to start to think about, well, how am I going to find out if I've answered those questions? And what kind of data will I collect? So I'm going to take a little sidebar here. Before I talk about the data and collecting, I want to talk about what we call stakeholders. Stakeholders are really the people that are involved in your project. So we want to begin with the end in mind with stakeholders, just like we do with our logic model. And I often share my logic model with people involved in my program so they can know exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. But also we want to think about getting buy-in from our stakeholders. And sharing evidence is a great way to do that. So, for example, if I'm taking my mobile laboratory to a school, I want to engage the students, of course. They're my primary goal. But I also want to engage the teachers, and I want to engage the administration. I want to involve them, let them know not only to gain access, right? Gain access to the school property, to maybe be able to possibly administer a survey or interview the teachers. I want to talk to them about the value that they bring. And also, the same goes for stakeholders that might be out in the community. So say you want to set up your mobile lab at a town fair. You want to be able to engage the people that are going to give you access to the site, and also the people that are coming by your mobile lab to participate. You might have a table set up, and you might say, When you come out of the lab, would you stop by this table and answer a few questions for me? We really want to improve our mobile lab, make sure we're accomplishing goals that are meaningful. So engaging your stakeholders both for the logistics aspect, but also to create buy-in to establish value, that'll help you with your data collection. Okay, getting back to data collection. I have a chart here that has the impact categories again on the left, just like they were before. I have the same evaluation questions, but now I want to talk about how I might collect that data. So if I want to know to what extent students understand the importance of sustainable energy resources, I might ask them that. Like, we might just straight up talk about that while we're in the mobile lab, and I may have a volunteer or staff person collecting student responses, taking field notes with what they say. I also can do that in a quick survey. If I want to know if they're able to identify a wide range of diverse people as scientists, I might do some sort of card sorting exercise at the end of their time on the lab. If I want to understand how they're using the microscopes, and if they're using some of the features and tools that I've shared with them, I might have an observational rubric where I have, again, a volunteer or staff member who's taking observational data and marking it on the rubric. Back to the questions related to interest or engagement. If I want to know to what extent do students discuss lab activities in class after participating, I may want to engage the teachers in maybe an interview or a focus group a little bit later after I've had my visits to the school. I might survey the students and find out, are they still thinking about in certain times during their visit? And then attitude. We have the same two questions. Do students have a more positive attitude? Do they have a better appreciation for limited energy resources? I could, again, do that as part of a discussion, a survey, interview with teachers and students after a period of time as well. The important thing to remember is data collection doesn't have to happen only as a pre and post, before the experience and after the experience. It doesn't have to be just a survey. It can include other forms of data, field notes, and discussion tools. And one measure can look at many different things. So I could use a survey to find out what students know about sustainable energy resources after visiting the lab, but I could also ask in that same survey about their attitude towards sustainable energy resources. Okay. Here are some tips for mobile lab evaluation. We want to be mindful of your impact goals. So what is it that you're wanting to accomplish in your mobile lab? Remember, beginning with the end in mind and being mindful. You know how much time you have and access you have to the students. You will want to do things that are achievable, well, evaluate, and then decide what you can add on. If you know you have 45 minutes with students each time you visit and you're evaluating yourself along the way and finding that your time is being most spent in certain ways, it'll help you decide what to streamline and what to add. Try to incorporate evaluation activities into your activities. Like I said, it doesn't have to be just a survey at the end. Be aware of pre-testing, particularly students in K-12. Some of them are subject to a lot of testing, but also another reason why to maybe step away from pre-testing is it can create a barrier to students if they feel like they're already a failure or already don't know something before they begin. So while it might be tempting before they engage in your mobile lab to say, hey, have you ever used a microscope before? Okay, that's a less threatening question than how do you set up a microscope slide? Or have you ever touched an agar plate before? We want to make it entry level for students and experiential so that they can engage immediately and not have any barriers before they start. We, of course, also want to be aware of cultural differences, and a great way to increase awareness is to, again, engage the stakeholders, engage the teachers, administration, and community members as you're preparing to enter that space. Again, engage those stakeholders early and often. Check in, share your evidence, and ask them to share their evidence. Okay, we're kind of wrapping up the evaluation process. Before in that cyclical model, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about, well, we have all that data now. What does that data mean, and how do we analyze, and just a snippet on reporting. So there's two different types of data that people often think of. One is quantitative data. Quantitative data is usually related to numerical things, like this is a picture that could be a survey that the students fill out as they're leaving the mobile lab that asks, did they enjoy it? Was it just meh, or did they dislike it? And the quantitative data is often related to something numerical, like 80% of the students said that the mobile lab was really fun, or can be population counts. We had 60 students visit our mobile lab during the month of October. There's also qualitative data. Qualitative data is data that is open-ended, narrative. It could be also observational, and it could be field notes. It's typically words and communication related to an experience. And actually pulled, this quote is from previous webinars, and this is a great example of qualitative data. From BioBus. It says, it's a quote from a student. It says, I can remember when I was in middle school and boarded the BioBus, went home and told my parents, I do not want to be a lawyer no more, I want to be a scientist. So qualitative data presents another rich point. And ideally, in evaluation, you want to take a mixed approach. You want to have some quantitative data and some qualitative data. You want to analyze all of your data, interpret those results, and that can happen in a variety of ways. An evaluator like myself or our staff at NYSER, we can help in the not only analyzing the data, but also in parts of the collection of the data, and then you want to create a report. And evaluators can do that, and use that report to communicate to your stakeholders their return on investment, your funders. Okay, you'll notice that I've highlighted again, map your project. After you have gone through the evaluation process, remember it's cyclical and it keeps going throughout the duration of your project. Sometimes after you have all that data and you've reported it, you need to make a decision. To maybe change directions or take a different path. So our project, the mobile lab project that we were talking about, that's loosely translated from BioBus, we might decide that maybe a physical space is offered to us, and we want to take advantage of not only our mobile lab, but we want to take advantage of a physical space that's been offered to us. So that might change our project map a little bit. That might change our logic model a little bit. It may add additional features. So we always want to be re-evaluating so that we're getting the greatest return on investment. Okay. I'm going to pause here for questions and comments and open that up to Sarah. So if you haven't added anything to the chat box, please go ahead and do that.
Thank you, Sandra. That was wonderful and very clear. And thank you for the model BioBus. I think we're going to some of those evaluation questions and just use them right away.
Oh, good. I hope I hope I did it justice. So there's always some danger in using the host example project.
So please, if you have questions, go go ahead and type them in now. Okay, great. So we have a question from Alyssa. Hi, Alyssa. Our museum education programs are typically about 45 minutes long. I sometimes struggle with how much impact to expect as we frame goals with the one-time 45-minute intervention. And I want to say, Alyssa, from my personal experience, is very similar. So BioBus in New York City, our programs are the most common interaction is also a 45-minute period. And I think when we first started, we expected that would that we would be able to have, that we would change every student's life the way that we changed that one student whose quote was mentioned.
Oh, right.
But that's a high bar for a 45-minute period. So, Sandra, how would you go about that?
So that's a good question, and it is very tricky, and I think that's part of the reason why when you look for evaluation, or when I look for evaluation information about informal science education, there is not a whole lot out there. And what I think is something that I have seen work for people is to take a look at streamline a few things that you hope to gain from that 45-minute session. So sometimes when I work with clients, they want to do a lot of things and show a lot of results. Like you were saying, you want it to be this earth-shattering, moving moment. And in 45 minutes, it's really hard to do that. And it's best to define a streamlined approach to a few impacts that are measurable during that time. And in that situation where you may never see those scholars again that are engaging in your program, it may not be appropriate to try to catch them with a survey or impose on them in that way. They're coming to the museum to enjoy that activity. Qualitative data can be a good way to gather data. Also, participant observation is a good way to gather data in that situation as well. So you may ask a question and engage in discussion and see an increase in the number of hands that go up. You may take field notes about responses that the students or scholars that are participating in the program say to you. What questions are they asking, and what responses are they giving? And that'll be good formative evaluation for adapting that 45-minute interval with students in the future.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Pam. Hi, Pam. About any tips for how to collect qualitative data from children?
Okay. So qualitative data makes my heart beat fast, so that's my favorite, although I have a healthy appreciation for quantitative as well. In discussions that you have in your mobile laboratory or whatever setting you're doing, I like to have someone with me who's kind of my field note taker. I really want to engage with the students that I'm with. So I sometimes have someone take notes with me, things that students say, and also if it's allowable, for example, in a school system setting, you may be able to do a focus group with the children after the fact and say, the mobile lab came and visited early in the month, and you want to go back the next month and say, talk with the students and find out what they remember from their visit. Focus groups can work really well that way. But qualitative data, as it's happening, is extraordinarily powerful. And what children are saying is great, rich data for evidence purposes. So I would say have a colleague with you to help with interactions.
Thank you. Good question from David. What defines a good evaluation question when attempting to acquire data?
Okay.
So maybe say, I think another thing that often comes up is how do you know what is reasonable to what you can actually measure, right?
Right.
Maybe those are actually two separate questions.
Those are excellent questions, and you made a good comment. I kind of think of it in like a backwards design. So I think about, well, what impact do I want to have? So if my impact is that I want to, let's just say I want to increase exposure to STEM careers for middle school female students, let's just say. So those are my impact, the impact I want to have. I want more females in middle school to be aware of different STEM careers. So I want to work backwards. I know what I want to accomplish, and I want to build my questions from there. So my question might be, are female middle school students able to identify four careers for female scientists, let's just say. And so I want to collect data about what they're able to communicate about career options for them. And ideally, we want them to understand that they can do absolutely any career in STEM fields. But if our goal is for them to be able to communicate some to you, you can define a measure for that. And then in the evaluation process, you may decide you want to change that. You may decide that, oh, I want them to do more than just identify them. I want them to be able to tell me what they would need to study in school to become that scientist. So it's a very fluid process. Begin with the end in mind, create some questions, and it is absolutely okay and encouraged to revisit and change those evaluation questions. And sometimes what I find funders and people who are donating to your program really like to see is that powerful evaluation piece that I was just expecting the girls to be able to tell me four or so careers that they could go to in, say, engineering. But whoa, they were able to tell me this much more. So now I ask them to tell me about what they study to achieve that career. So I've made a change in my program based on what my evaluation showed me my students were able to do.
That's a really good point. You don't need to feel locked into the evaluation questions that you have at the beginning.
That's right. That's right.
Right. We have a question from Desan, who you might remember was also with us in Tennessee.
Yes, hello.
And she's curious about the 1-month follow-up. What percentage of participants do you need to engage with in a follow-up in order to actually collect meaningful data? And I think this is a really interesting question for mobile labs in general, not just the number of participants, but also making sure that your sample accurately reflects your overall population that we're serving. Because at least for our mobile lab, we see 30,000 people a year in very different settings, very different ages. And so it can get quite tricky to have a representative sample. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and this is like a big can of worms that evaluators argue about all the time. So social scientists argue about this in a very heated way. And so I'll give you both sides of the coin. How about that? So in quantitative analysis, so statistical analysis, there are benchmark numbers that people look for that would represent their population. Qualitative researchers, some, not all, but many are a bit more relaxed about that. And they talk about a point when you reach what they call saturation. And so saturation might come after talking to 9 students, 18 students, 20 students, and the evaluators talk about different ways of sampling, one of which being purposeful sampling. So that's just one type. So you might say, I have been in my mobile lab and I have visited 3 states in the southeastern part of the United States. But I want to talk with students, and I want to talk to enough where I start hearing the same thing again and again. I've reached saturation. I might purposefully sample a few students from each school or geographic area or these socioeconomic status, as long as you can provide evidence as to why you purposefully sampled that group. In qualitative research, there is no magic number. If you're running certain statistical analyses, you'll need patterns.
Sorry, Sandra, you just cut out for a moment. Can you repeat that?
Oh, sure. As long as you're describing, you're providing evidence as to why you did this purposeful sampling and that you've reached saturation, where you've started to get the same response, the same type of response. There is no magic number for qualitative data in evaluation research. For some statistical analyses, yes, there are, but it's more about providing the evidence. And you can go to research for that. You can cite researchers to say, hey, this qualitative researcher says that I'm going to reach saturation at 12, but this one says it's going to happen at 9. But I started noticing as I was interviewing students that when I hit about 15 students from this purposeful sample of different schools, I started to hear similar responses, and so I stopped at this point. I wish it was a more definitive number.
I think for myself and some other members of this community, it's hard to go from the hard science world into social science world and understand how to shift gears in terms of thinking about different methodologies.
Yeah, that's true.
We always want those hard and fast numbers.
That's right, that's right.
You need to kind of let that go.
If you're going to do a factor analysis, yes, maybe.
So Patrick has a question about when we should bring in NYSER or another independent evaluator. At what point in program development?
So as soon as possible. The beginning is ideal, but any time along the process. So we do evaluation work for many different programs, and sometimes we start out right on the ground floor as they're planning their project and thinking about how it will be funded and what they're going to do. But then sometimes people contact us and say, hey, will you work on this contract with us? We've had this program in place, but we really need help gathering evidence for our funding agencies, or we really want to know how we're doing and we need the help of an evaluator. So if possible, at the very beginning would be great, but anytime, it's never too late to get started.
Great. Thank you, says Patrick. He might follow up with you soon.
Okay, good. I'm going to share my email soon.
Okay. Are there any more questions? All right. So thank you so much, Sandra, for this presentation. I do want to say that I know, like as we've discussed on this call, people are at different stages in terms of how they think you're thinking about program evaluation. Some of us have been running programs for quite some time and have implemented various forms of evaluation. Some are newer to this. I do want to mention, for those of you who are newer to the Mobile Lab community, the Mobile Lab Coalition, there was a paper published by two of our board members, Amanda Jones and Mary Stapleton, in PLOS Biology this year, describing the overall collective activities of the Mobile Lab Coalition. So we as a coalition have reached over 1 million students, and we also, and they also described in that paper that there's a lot of different approaches that programs take towards evaluation. We don't have one hard and fast set of evaluation questions, but as a coalition, we're working towards developing that. So we wanted to have this webinar today as an introduction to the program evaluation field, and we'll be following up with some more in-depth discussion on how we start to think about our collective work. While I'm talking about the future, I also want to announce that our next webinar is going to be in just over a month on September 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern, and it's on the topic of how we engage corporate partnerships to support informal science. So we had a past webinar on fundraising and most in general, and then the second one will be following up and thinking specifically about corporate partners and what those relationships look like.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that well, actually, come to think of it, I have a few resources that may help, because I know you're looking toward that larger framework for mobile labs. I have a few, just a couple of resources I put here that may be helpful to people that are watching. So we have NYSER has an evaluation channel on YouTube that has some videos, and then we have a longer Program Evaluation 101 video that was part of an NSF Includes grant. But then if you visit our website, stemeval.org, we have some resources there. And then I have a couple of favorites. Betterevaluation.org is a website that I go to. That's my first stop. When I do an evaluation project, I go there often to look for templates and frameworks, and they have great videos. They have a search box, and if you type in informal evaluation, they have a few resources. And then you probably are already familiar with informalscience.org. If you put in /evaluation, there's great information there. And then I also use Evaluate, which is another NSF-funded evaluation source. So I just wanted to share those with you for places people can go for more information. And then I'll put my email address up there, and also Pam Bishop's, our director's, email address. And please feel free to contact us anytime if you have any questions that come to mind, in the future. And like us on Facebook and Twitter.
Yes, and thank you, Pam. This webinar will be has been recorded and will be shared and can be referenced. And you'll also share the slide deck.
I will. I'll share that with you, and then I have another. Pam put together a wonderful list of resources that people can also go to that I'll share with you for the email as well.
Fantastic. And speaking of Facebook, please, we're continuing all these wonderful conversations about how to continue to improve our mobile science projects and programs and reach more students and have greater impact on our Facebook page, Mobile Laboratory Coalition, and we look forward to working with you all to reach potentially millions more people, more kids.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, and I'm actually going to hit the road. We're moving from Idaho back towards New York City.
Good luck. Safe travels. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.